You're listening to the Ranch Stewards Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the stewardship and conservation of grasslands, diverse ecological landscapes, and the salt of the earth individuals who dedicate their lives to this endeavor. And now here's your host, Haylie Shipp.
Who wouldn't like a deep tissue massage? Well, it turns out your soil may be just as overdue for one as you are, but in the soil's case, it's the cows that can actually do the work. On today's Ranch Stewards Podcast, we are going to be talking about bale grazing, flexibility in ranch life, and also trickling in how virtual fencing is fitting into the mix. I am your host, Haylie Shipp, joined today by two ranchers. I've got Todd Barkley. He's from outside of Baker, Montana, and also Casey Buffington from outside of Chester, Montana. So, Todd, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit more about your operation and then how bale grazing first came onto your radar.
So we're a cow-calf and farming operation, and we run some stockers. We generally retain all of our heifer calves. We have a fall calving herd also, and so we'll run those calves over as our stocker projects. We run about 350 head of cows, so we try and sell a load of steers in the fall, and then the balance of those steers and heifers we run over as stockers also. We farm about 3,000 acres. That's including the hay ground. We seeded, about a quarter of that back to Roundup Ready alfalfa in the last 7-8 years. And so our winter feeding program has changed a little bit since we started doing that. But yeah, we try to practice some regenerative agriculture. And we do some alternative feeding techniques and farming techniques. So yeah.
And then, Casey, why don't you give us a little bit of your background? You're more from the north central part of the state.
Yeah, we call Chester home, but we're down here south of Tiber Dam a little ways. Same basic operation. We're a cow-calf operation first. We do hold back a couple of feeders every year and feed them out for direct-to-consumer sales. And we just try and keep the cows out grazing as much as possible. I think every day that you can let a cow be a cow, the better off they're going to be. The more you can fine them, the more stress they're going to have, and fighting over feed first thing in the morning. So yeah, we've learned to kind of let them graze as much as we possibly can, and that's where we're headed, I guess, with our program.
So what we're talking about today is bale grazing, and to just kind of give the audience and you two some perspective on where I was coming to this from, the Western Sustainability Exchange hosts a call on a consistent basis that they call their bull session. And the bull session that I was on late in December was just sort of an open forum. And actually the discussion was on, those times that you have learned the hard way, the things that you have done really wrong, and can you share those lessons with us so that the rest of the audience can learn from your mistakes? And the discussion kept on coming back to bale grazing because some people had some follies that they were discussing, and then people just wanted more and more information on it. And so I got thinking, well, if this is what people are asking about in this format, this room of 20 some ranchers, this has got to be something that we're talking more about on this Ranch Stewards Podcast. And so for just to kind of set the stage and get the formal definition, the NRCS definition, so the Natural Resources Conservation Service with the USDA, it's planned winter feeding where livestock gain controlled access to harvested hay bales that are set out in the field, often on low fertility or degraded land, using temporary electric fencing to manage grazing and distribute manure and nutrients to build soil health, reduce erosion, and save labor or fuel. So that's an AI overview of the NRCS description. So I don't want to say that's necessarily NRCS's verbatim. But Todd, why don't you give us some perspective of how you first got into bale grazing, how it started to interest you?
Yeah, so it was in the early 2000s. Ann Fisher, our CD and at the NRCS, had invited Neil Dennis from Canada, who sort of is one of the first, had this concept. Gabe Brown, Jerry Doan. It was like the who's who in regenerative agriculture clear back in the 2000s, right? And the meeting was in Baker. And I was feeding cows, and I had my bale processor, and I had a couple bales in the back, and in the processor, and I had 2 in the front, and I'm trying to get my chores done to get into this. And I go in and I listen to Neil Dennis and his bale grazing, and it was just like a light turned on, you know. And from that day on, we went to 7-day feedings. We don't do a concentrated bale grazing all the time. I liked how Neil put it. He says, you want to do the deep massage, you put the bales out and let them graze, sort of like your description of NRCS. But a lot of what I would do is, like I said, I'd do a 7-day feeding, but I'd pick 3 different spots on hilltops, and I'd roll the bales out, maybe like whatever I could drop them and they'd roll. I wouldn't spend a lot of time rolling them out, and I'd do them in a star shaped pattern. So then I could split those star shapes, around. So it was in the early 2000s, and I guess we have refined our technique. It is a technique. I mean, I can see where people can have some problems because it's something new, and I think we've got it down pat really good. My son does it over in North Dakota on his ranch, and I mean it. So that's where we started. We've refined it, and we can get into that later on some of the do's and don'ts. But it was the early 2000s. I got to give credit to Ann Fisher, Neil Dennis. Them were the 2 that really got me started on it. So
Todd, 7-day feedings, you're putting out 7 days worth of feed, 1 day just making a concentrated effort and then leaving it be.
Yep, leaving it be. And there's two reasons for that. And it gets into the efficiencies of starting that tractor, opening the gates, all that stuff that if you're doing it every day, that adds up, right? And so I got away from the bale processor and I put a flatbed trailer behind my tractor, and maybe I feed in several different herds now too, but maybe I'll have 16 bales on and I'll just set them, in 3 different spots, types of hay and quality of hay and amount of hay. There's a lot. There's a formula I use when I start putting my hay out, and I want to be honest about what my cows weigh. I want to be honest about what my bales weigh, and I want to be honest about the aftermath grazing I have out there, my stockpiled forage, because all of those, if you don't have them right, you're going to end up with, oh my, there's a lot of hay being quote unquote wasted. And I don't like to feed my soil a bunch of hay. I like to feed my soil what's coming out of them cows back end, So we have it refined to where, there is not a lot of hay waste, but there's a lot of manure and urine concentrated, and a lot of hoof action. I think the hoof action is really important. Concentrated on where we're doing the feedings. And we also, a lot of our grass alfalfa, we have about 400 acres that we've seeded back to alfalfa with a western wheatgrass, green needle, and slender wheatgrass, so some natives in there. So we can actually go out on our native range and feed that way also, like on hard pan gumbo and stuff like that. So we're getting a lot of those native bare ground areas to repopulate with stuff. So yeah.
Casey, how about you? What first prompted your interest in bale grazing?
Yeah, so we're, Todd mentioned the name Gabe Brown, and that was a huge factor. I have a neighbor up here that transitioned his farm from conventional to organic, and with that came all these regenerative practices that he was reading about. And Johnny Wicks up here on the hill he said, hey, if you're interested in learning about some regenerative stuff, he said, I think it's going to kind of be an up-and-coming deal, and I think we could really work together. So we're doing a slightly different in the regards that we're doing most of our bale grazing on our neighbor's farm ground. So, you were talking about introducing some native seeds into the native range and stuff. We're doing a slightly different, just where we feed at, it's predominantly farm ground. We're just surrounded by farmers, and a lot of them are starting to see the added benefits of having, like you said, the manure and the urine and the hoof impact. Even the hoof impact on the farm ground plays a pretty, kind of stirs up that farm ground and gets everything kind of popping again in the spring. Sometimes a little too much. You get a lot of weeds out there sometimes, but That's as you were asking, we've kind of figured out if we feed a little bit further out apart, you don't have it so concentrated and it doesn't activate the weed beds right all in the same spot. So we've noticed you don't get quite as many weeds if you kind of spread those bales out a little further. But, what's a weed? A weed's different to everybody. Our cows love the weeds, so we go out there and graze those weeds first thing in the spring, and it's great forage. So if you kind of, I know farmers don't really like to hear the word weeds in their farm ground, but sometimes it has a benefit, and if you can kind of change your way of thinking and call it forage rather than weed, then we've seen a lot of added benefits. So yeah, Johnny kind of introduced me to Gabe Brown probably 10 years ago, and just kind of started doing some reading and some research. And I work with my dad out here, and we sometimes have different ways of thinking. So it took a couple of years of kind of talking about it and discussing it before we were ready to try it. And then, time plays a huge factor. And so we all have jobs off the ranch, so we're all running different directions. And when you got to feed 200-300 head every single morning, if everybody's got to go to their job, it gets to be real time consuming and not real pleasant to go out and do that every single morning when you're trying to rush to get to your job. So it just so happened one year, we kind of ran into, we all have things that we all had to get out and go do. And so we're like, well, let's try the bale grazing. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't, but let's at least try it. So that's, it took a couple years of conversation, but finally it just kind of came to a bottleneck to where we either tried it or we kind of suffered through it. And so we tried it. And as Todd was talking about earlier, it's one of those ones where we're not always doing it, but when it's beneficial for the herd and for the animals and for the ground, that's kind of when we really like to dial it in. So yeah, just neighbors talking about different farming and ranching practices is kind of where we got started at.
I'm loving this because you guys are giving me a permission slip because I am doing it for the first time this afternoon. I'm setting out my bales I'm going to be gone for 2 days because I have to be gone for work. Not enough to trouble neighbors to come and feed for me. The weather is nice. I'm not super worried about the cows, but they do need to get something set out. And so I'm going to try it in a couple of different spots and get it set out. And I know that they'll be fine, but it's going to be the first time I try it. So, Todd, because you are just kind of setting out for 7 days, I'm going to direct this to you. When I am rolling out bales and I roll out in a different spot in my pasture, it seems like sometimes it takes those ladies a little while to figure out where I'm feeding. I have to kind of sit there and rev up the truck, honk the horn for them to notice what I'm doing up on the hill versus feeding, down on the flats. So they just find these bales when you've got them plopped in different spots, or do you have to kind of show them where they're at?
Yeah, so that's part of manipulating your cattle, right? We found a long time ago that when cows have to come to us for feed, when I want to move my cows, we can move our cows because they're used to following where I go. And we took on a neighbor's herd of cows. We had leased his farmland, and he had passed away. So we took over his cows, and them cows were always used to that hay coming to them, right? So, and we had mixed our herd. We run a combined herd, and so we'd start feeding on the opposite end of where the cows are, because that's always what we do. If the cows are here, we'll take the trailer away from them. So they do have to come to us. And so, they'll learn, they adapt to that. And one of the reasons I do the 7-day feeding is if you start doing your math with your bale grazing, and so say sometimes you're a quarter of a bale long or a half a bale long with your weight, that 7 days just gives you a nice way to figure in the total pounds that you're feeding those cows. And if you really start watching it, after about the third week, those cows because they'll consume that in the first 5 days, right? And depending on how much you're putting out, whatever, how much aftermath you got. But after like the third week of all this, that gives Mother Nature enough time to sort of start breaking down their pee and their poo, and they'll start revisiting those areas that you fed, previously. And, it just, Mother Nature has to have time to evaporate that stuff out of there. So yeah, so I like to do the 3 different locations though, on hilltops, away from their loafing area, away from their water. You want to get them as far away from where they want to be as you can, or else, we have a lot of woody draws. If I fed down in the woody draws, I mean, I just nutrient overload, kill all my trees. So I want them out where they're just out there to eat. They're not out there to lounge. They're not. So yeah, does that answer it? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I,
absolutely.
and when I want to move my cows in the wintertime, I don't need anybody behind them. They follow me, and we move 3-4 miles. I mean, we winter all over the ranch. That's another thing I like about this bale grazing. I can winter 8 miles away, um, because I'm just going down there with my loader or with my flatbed trailer, and that's where I have some of my hay anyways. And when I come home, I'll just load that trailer up and bring hay home for around the feedlot or for when we start calving and stuff like that. Um, I don't leave my bales out in the fields, but I don't bring them anywhere. I mean, we hike them off to the side. We put electric fence around them, and so that's helped with the efficiency too and time saving. We don't stack anything anymore. Everything's single file, in logs, and so what little bit of hay we do leave on the ground, I think we always make up for it on how we're starting to store our hay now too. Some of that hay is maybe 3-4 years old, and you unroll it and it looks just like you put it up.
Montana. We are proud to say it's where we live and where we work. The vibe is different here. We are friendly, caring, hardworking, resilient, and resourceful. No one else covers Montana or cares for Montana more than Stockman Bank. To us, Montana isn't just a place. It's the only place we do business. That's why we are Montana's brand of banking.
So, Casey, how is some of this working in practice for you? And then you are doing that new sexy thing this year of virtual collars, which is, I mean, that is all the rage right now when we talk about trending things in agriculture. So, how are you planning on implementing that?
Yeah, so I'm working with the virtual fence company called Halter. They'll actually be coming up next week to do a little film out here at the ranch, and so it'll kind of explain it on a broader level. But yeah, same thing. I mean, time is a huge deal to us. I know my time. A lot of people say you can't put a pencil to your time, and I totally disagree. I think your time's about the most valuable thing that you have to offer. Especially with me, I have 3 kids, share custody of them, and I get them every other week. And it always seemed like uh, every time I had a storm blew in and the cows blew through the fence, and then I had to spend 3 days gathering them all back up in a blizzard. It seemed like it was always on the weeks that I had the kids. And so to me, time is about the most valuable thing that I have. And my biggest investment is going to be in my children. And so it just made sense to try and, like I said earlier, every day you can let a cow be a cow, they're going to be better off. And right now, I was really excited to try the bale grazing with the collars, but we're having a pretty oddball winter, and I still got my cows 10 miles from home, and they're out grazing. And I'm really pushing the boundaries of this fence. I got about a half of a mile on the east side of the pasture that I don't have a hot wire. I don't have a 4-wire bob wire fence. It's just nothing but a field road. And I haven't had a cow out in 8 weeks. Ever since I put the collars on, I haven't had a cow out at all. But one of the things I was really looking forward to trying, which, like I said, with the winter we're having, it's not gonna, maybe a little later if we get some snow is what I want to try. But same thing, we do a 7-day ration. We do it a little bit different. I do want to pick Todd's brain on that a little bit more if I get the chance here at the end, because we've always fed close to the water source, but I've never really heard anybody explain it like Todd just did. And that makes a lot of sense to kind of spread them out and make them venture out a little bit. But and it worked really well with this system, that halter collar that I'm talking about, because what I'd like to do is I'd like to go put out, I could put out 2 weeks worth of hay now and set up my breaks, which they call when they drop the virtual fence. And I could set it up at 8 o'clock every single morning for 2 weeks and only give them access to a day's worth of hay. So then you're really talking about getting the better hay utilization. Todd touched base on it where, once again, if you change your way of thinking and don't really consider it lost hay, but consider it, a little bit more beneficial for the ground, and whatnot, you're not really losing that much hay. And we experience the same stuff. Those cows a week later, 2 weeks later, will come back to where you fed, and they'll clean up all the aftermath of what they left behind. But it really made sense to me when I was talking to these collar guys to set out, do the same thing, go out every Sunday afternoon is when we usually go set out our hay, and then just set up my breaks in that pasture to where they're only getting a day's worth of hay. So then I'm excited to try it. I don't know what it's going to do, but it makes sense to me that the hay utilization is just going to be even better. We do it a little bit different than Todd does. We don't roll anything out. If we go put 40 or 50 bales out, we put them in a grid pattern and just set them on the end, unwrap the net wrap, and then we just let the cows have at them. And they spread it out, and they make a mess of everything, which is great. Like I said, it smashes it down into the ground, and the farmer gets the benefit to having some organic matter going back into the soil along with the cow aftermath. So the idea of lost hay doesn't really resonate with me because there's just so much benefit to that stuff getting pounded into the ground. But if the cows will eat more of it on a day-to-day basis rather than just giving them 7 days worth of feed, it'll be fun to experiment with. I'm excited to try it out. Kind of bummed out we don't have much of a winter to do it right now, but that's all right too.
Right.
Bummed out we're not feeding yet. That's a strange feeling to have.
Yeah.
Locations.
Oh yeah. So, manure runs downhill, right? Or S runs downhill. So I like to go on the hilltop. So when we do get some runoff or what have you, I like it to just sort of disperse out throughout the hay fields. We're normally at less than 50% feeding up until probably April. We feed more hay in April and May when we start calving than we do all winter, and when we start doing that, I put out the 7 day, and then we're pretty much on full feed because we're in a section pasture. We calve one of the bunches of cows. We calve in 4 different bunches too, but one of the bunches of cows are in a section pasture that probably has 3 miles of woody draws in it. And in between those woody draws are farm fields. So there's not a lot of grass. And I got collars too, but I'm E-Shepherd, so I got Gallagher. And we go up and down those woody draws in the summertime with the collars this year in that pasture, grazing burdock and Canada thistle. So I'm not going to have even as much grass as I normally have. So they'll be full feed, but we roll everything out during calving because we've had the problem of they'll eat those bales into a mushroom, and then the baby calves will lay underneath that mushroom, and then all of a sudden the bale tips over and you suffocate a baby calf. And when we roll them out, that gives the baby calves someplace to lay too, saves energy. And that's another thing I'd like to bring up. Like in the wintertime when it's cold and we're laying those out and you see those cows lounging on that hay, even on a hilltop, right? That's sort of giving you an energy credit. I think that's pretty important because most all of our hay is sufficient in protein. A lot of times we're lacking the energy. So anytime we can give that cow, a little step up on their energy, and even if that makes it a mat that they're laying on instead of laying on cold ground, I think that's a benefit to that too. So we do roll them out, and a lot of times our hay, we're feeding 2 and 3 year old hay, so the net wrap isn't real fun to take off because it's froze on or it's chunked on or whatever. And so we're ending up picking up our net wrap afterwards. And what was the other question, Haylie? I sort of got off on a rabbit
Just
hole there.
the placement of where you're putting those bales.
Yeah, every place. I mean, even when I go out, so I'll even feed in September, right? I'll feed my second cutting alfalfa starting into September, October, just whatever I'm looking for hard pan gumbo spots out in the native. Every time I got a purpose to feed them cows or to meet their nutrient requirements. But when I'm doing that, I'm looking at some place to heal on my ground too, right? And same way when I'm on my farm or hay fields with my tame grass, which is mostly in the spring when we're calving, I'm looking for the parts of that hay field that have the hard pan gumbo or the sandy hilltops or, just always someplace. I'm always addressing the ground. That's almost primary. I know I got to feed anyways, so I might as well find a place that I can feed. So the placement is always, even when we're calving, not down in the woody draws, not where they're going to lounge, not by water. Them are just two of the crucial ones. And then I don't like to put tame grass on native. I just, we get enough of that in the manure, and even in the Latin seed bank. I mean, I'm doing some stuff on some really bare ground that's in amongst old CRP ground, thinking I'm going to get some native to come up because I'm just using grain hay or this Roundup Ready alfalfa that I know I'm not putting any seeds, into that. And I'll get crested and brome grass coming up, but there's just that seed bank there, But I really, really try to keep the tame grass off of the native, So that's, I guess that's it. I think one of the most important things, though, if a person's looking at doing it, is really dialing in on how much aftermath grazing you have, the quality of your hay, because it doesn't matter if you put out 50 pounds a day. If that hay you're putting out isn't meeting their nutrient requirements, they're just going to tank up on, and they're not going to do very good. So I know one of the questions was, well, how do you put out quality of hay? And we shoot for even when we're on full feed, we shoot for 2.5% of their body weight, but we want to make sure that there's some alfalfa, there's some good quality forage, because they will pick through. If you have some aftermath grazing, they're going to leave the hay that they don't like, and they're going to go out and graze that pasture until that pasture's used up, and they are forced to come back and eat that bad hay, So, and when our pastures start to get a little bit short and we want to not graze them so hard, then we start rolling out better hay for them too. So they'll actually fill up on the hay instead of going out and picking, So I'm going to be interested with the collars, because I've always felt one of the benefits of feeding that 7 days is, another one of the questions that a lot of times comes out is like, what about the boss cows and the young cows and everything? And when I have 7 days spread out over 3 different areas or 2 different, for me, I like to do 3. Them young cows can get away from their boss cows, and they always have a place to go to eat. They always have that 7 days worth of feed, and they'll eat it up in 5. They just will. But the last 2 or the next 2, they're out grazing, and so I've always felt that having that much feed in front of them sort of eliminates that boss cow, timid cow type of a factor. And we still sort our young cows and our old cows. We do that because we sort of calve that way too. And a lot of our winter feeding is how we're going to calve. And, but yeah, so I'll be interested. I do have the collars, and we've had an open winter too, and we have a lot of stockpile forage. So we're just doing alfalfa every 3rd day. And, but it'd be interesting to see how you get along with just a 1-day feeding. And if you notice that the boss cows are starting to, push the young cows away or whatever.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting because like you were talking about rolling them out. If Dad and I typically winter together, we have 2 separate herds, but we run them as one. But I hopped on board with the virtual fencing, and I think he's gonna do it this year. So we're 1 year apart. So I want to keep my cows separate just for this year, just to be able to implement all these grazing practices. But as you were just talking about rolling everything out, if I only have about 120 cows that I'll have on feed, I might toss my heifer calves out there with them. So it might be closer to 160. But with that, I won't be able to put out enough hay, as we talked about, putting them on end and just leaving them, because I won't have enough bunk space, and those younger heifers will get pushed out of there. So I will have to roll mine out if I'm going to feed on a day-to-day, break pattern with the fence. So it'll be a little bit different. It'll be interesting, but we feed over, like I said, on my neighbor's farm ground over there, and we're pretty fortunate because it's a couple 1,000-acre pasture that has native grass, improved pasture. It's usually got stubble from lentils, peas, and some sort of small grain all right there. So what we've noticed when it comes to the bale grazing is the more variety of hay we can put out. We might have barley hay, we might have some grass alfalfa, and then we might have some straight grass, kind of whatever we can get put up for the year. And the year that our cows probably looked the best was the year that we had a whole bunch of 2 and 3-year-old hay and very little really good of that year's hay. And we would kind of ration it. I don't know exactly what the numbers were, but we'd put out about a quarter of our bales that we'd stick out for the week were that year's really good, high quality alfalfa grass hay. And then the rest of them were the 2-year-old barley hay and stuff like that. And I have no idea why, but we noticed that they would go to that 2-year-old barley hay first and eat all that stuff up. And then the good hay, which we thought they would just attack right away, that was the stuff that was getting eaten on day 4, 5, 6. And it was mind boggling. I still have no idea why. I don't know the science behind that or anything, but yeah. And then, like you said, they're usually done on day 5, and there's enough stubble and grasses out there that just go pick at. When we do come home for calving, we're on, we cross fenced our whole home place here, which used to be a farm back in the 80s. So we're calving on essentially CRP stands, and we're set up to where we feed half ration and let them graze half ration, and they're 200-acre paddocks, and we just kind of move every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, whatever we need to do there. And so you were talking about during calving, you guys still roll them out, so it gives those calves room to lay, and we kind of do the same thing, just because we're not feeding as much as we were if they were on a full ration over in the neighbor's farm ground. And we roll out a couple of bales. We usually roll out some straw for the bedding. And then what we've noticed with the calving is, as you stated, those calves will lay right next to those bales. But during those storms and stuff, we've noticed that the calves will stay by those bales, and the cows will go pile up behind the windbreak. So you're not losing quite as many to them getting stomped on when everything congregates behind those windbreaks, because they do have that added bedding and windbreak and stuff like that. So kind of, 12 of one, half dozen of the other, but it's been nothing but beneficial for us when we need to use it.
Yeah, and I'd like to bring out too that, I'm an equal opportunity guy. So like, it doesn't have to be a fixed 7 days.
Right.
If it's going to be 30 below on day 7, I'm going out on day 6.
Yep.
And that doubles up. I mean, that gives that cow, she'll maybe get some more feed. She'll be full going through them blizzards or them storms, and I never try to go longer than the 7 days, but I will go shorter. I mean, if that weather is looking nasty, I'm not going to start my tractor in 30 below if I could start it at 0 or 10 above. I think that's what I like about it too, is it's just not a recipe book. You just don't have to, that's what I mean. It's a technique. You just have to ebb and flow with it, and the comfort level of the feed. If I want to do a deep massage, like Neil Dennis says, if I got a 5 or a 10 acre patch of hard pan gumbo that's just like a gumbo knob. I never get all my hay put up right. I'll get rain, I'll get, whatever. And I'll take those bales and I'll do exactly like what you do. I'll just put them in a grid. I'll put 70 bales out there and let the cows just have them, because I know they're going to waste that feed anyways, or some of that hay's not. But I also know that hard pan gumbo needs a bunch of that, So you can play around with it that way too. My second cutting alfalfa bales, I can deep massage with them too. It's just that the cows don't, they just don't get access to it like I like them to. I roll all my bales out when I'm feeding every 3rd day, second cutting alfalfa, just because I'm only putting out 10 pounds a day, 3 bales or 4 bales, the whole cows. But that gets back to that soil health principle. You're putting 1 million pounds of cows per acre for 20 minutes because they're on that small strip, right? You don't have to electric fence them 1 million pounds to the acre for 20 minutes. You can do it with a bale of hay. That's why, I use, instead of lick tubs anymore, I use the second cutting alfalfa, for a protein supplement. And just ebb and flow with it. It's a lot of fun to try and start managing it after a while. Back with you when I was growing up, Molly and I have put a bigger place together than our home place. We run on our home place, but my dad was also the sheriff, and my grandpa worked in the oil field, and I was in school, And I could remember every night when Dad came home at 6 o'clock, feeding those cows every night in an open cockpit, 880 Oliver. And it was in the 80s and 90s. It actually snowed. It was miserable. And I don't know if my dad just absolutely hated it, but I think he absolutely hated it. I think there's a reason that he stayed sheriff and I become the next generation on the ranch, and he helps out on the ranch. But when we started, and we had expanded to enough where winter chores was a job, right? I mean, I felt it. We were raising a young family and stuff, and there's health of soil, there's health of equipment, then there's health of body, and this way of feeding has allowed me to spend way more time with my family. Maybe Molly and I can go on a vacation. Maybe we can join a group that helps the state of Montana, maybe the agritourism, right? I mean, it has allowed us to do so many things without relying on neighbors or family and our cattle are more content and more calm and just more everything now than they ever were. They just really truly are, even only seeing them. And when we calve, Molly will check on them cows a little bit, but I'm farming in the spring. We don't start calving until the middle of April. And, they get checked when I feed them, basically. Molly will, go out there. But we try to mitigate those problems too. We buy light birth weight bulls and everything else. But so it's a whole system. It's just not the bale grazing part of it. It is the whole system. We've changed our whole ranch, that way. So.
Well, I think we've answered a lot of the questions that I had going into this, but I'm going to quick fire a couple of questions that folks had expressed to me. So one of the ones is, does it matter if you put the bale on side or on end? Do you guys see any difference, any preference there?
When I leave the net wrap on, if I want them to sort of have to get it out, then I'll put it on the end. When I'm feeding my horses, I'll tip it up on, or I'll let them eat it by the log. If I'm feeding my horses, I tip it up on end, and then I just cut down about a foot or two, so they have to start pulling it out the top. I even bale graze in my corrals in my feed lot. If I just have 10, I don't use a bale ring anymore, because a bale ring, they're always pulling it out and they're stomping it in. Where if you just put a bale out in the feed lot, they'll scatter it out, just like you were saying. And I mean, they do a really good job of cleaning that stuff up. If it's not sloppy, I mean, and that's another thing when we're feeding out in the spring. If that hay once ever gets rehydrated, gets rained on, gets snowed on, gets whatever, that really takes the palatability away from the cows. I don't know if you've noticed that, but I know they'll almost quit that hay if it gets super wet.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the only thing I can comment on that is we've never really experimented with it. You talk about only having to start your tractor once a day. For us, if we were to set it on end, unwrap it, then you'd have to bring that tractor back over, tip that bale over. So we've only ever set it on end, unwrapped it. As soon as that tractor sets it on the ground, Dad's usually running the tractor, and I'm usually out there running around, taking the net wrap off. And so we've only messed with that. And I guess to me, I don't think there'd be a better way than the other if you're just going to leave them there. If you're going to roll them out, obviously you'd have to tip it over. But to me, I don't think it would make a whole lot of difference.
How about wildlife impact? I think a lot of people asking this question were more from elk country, which Casey, you definitely aren't. Todd, you might have a little bit more pressure, but.
No, we don't have the pressure. We have some turkeys, we have some deer. I mean, we do have some elk, but not near in herds like it would bother us. But, I found out a long time ago that when the turkeys start on your grain hay, if you just take a bale, half a mile away from and give them a bale every 2 weeks, they'll stay on that bale. The same with the deer. You know what? I might feed my deer a second cutting alfalfa bale too, but I just soon sacrifice one bale every couple weeks than I would having them peeing and pooing on my stack. And the net wrap has really helped. So, but as far as the bale grazing, we have just had absolutely no problem. I could see maybe in elk country where that would be a problem. But but no, we don't see the animal or the wildlife impact at all on it. So
In case you're shaking your head too, so you're kind of antelope and some deer country, but nothing too major there.
Nope, antelope all migrate out of the area. They're kind of a nuisance for the farmers in the spring and summer, but no, we don't. We don't. I've never seen a deer down there picking on the hay, and we just don't have the animal population to really worry about. So
One of the discussion points was with the if you're feeding this way with straight alfalfa, that they expressed that the first year they didn't see the ground recover that great, but that then subsequent years they started to see some recovery. And I'm not, I don't have the knowledge of soil health and the heat that comes from grasses and that, but there was the hypothesis that perhaps it does get too hot on that soil when you've got alfalfa that you're setting there. Have you guys observed anything like that?
I feed a lot of straight alfalfa, but I don't. Unless I'm out in my native pastures, where I put it on just bare ground, bare ground. I haven't noticed that, but I mean, anytime you just set it there and there's a duff layer, you're going to have a year maybe that doesn't have, you might get some weeds, some annual weeds, some stuff like that, but that's just the progression of the soil health. So no, I haven't seen that, but a lot of our alfalfa we unroll and just basically, I guess you call it windrow graze it, where we want it. But and then I read one of those questions, on the website too, and I thought maybe they were more addressing if you were feeding it on alfalfa, like straight alfalfa ground, hay. And the alfalfa ground, I think, does respond a little bit slower just to come back. I think it bruises those crowns a little bit more. But, over the years or couple years, it doesn't seem to affect ours, And we do feed a fair amount on straight alfalfa ground, on the Roundup Ready alfalfa ground.
And Casey, you kind of discussed feeding, 2 years back hay and some old barley hay. Do you see any difference in the response of the soil?
Not like I said, we set it up in a grid pattern. So I mean, we'll take out a load of grass alfalfa and then a load of. I honestly don't know which bales were sitting where when we set them out. So I don't know if I have for sure yes or no on that. I've never really noticed. I did notice, and it made sense. The only thing I've really noticed this last year was we had a lot more weeds coming in, and it's because we fed. I think what Todd was just talking about this morning, too close to the water. So not only were they eating there, they were just there all day. And so I think we created that problem by just feeding too close to the water source and just making those cows too comfortable. So I don't know if that had to do with the type of hay or just the fact that we had it right there.
We need to get some drone imagery for you so you can see exactly what bales are where and then what it looks like afterwards.
Yeah.
You guys maybe already discussed this, but how far apart are you putting these bales?
If we're setting them on end and just leaving them, we usually shoot for that 15 to 20 feet. That way, if your bale's sitting here, the cow eating here on this bale isn't going to rub up against the cow that's eating over here on this other bale. So we shoot for about 20 feet, and that's kind of where we've noticed when those cows spread those bales out, there's no void in that hay. They'll stir it all up. So if we do a grid of 20 bales, we'll do 20, 20, 20 all the way across. And then that way you get that ground coverage that you're looking for with the hay getting spread out by the cows and not leaving any big voids in the middle of it.
Yeah, and so like when we're feeding on the hilltops, we just park the flatbed trailer and tractor, and I can haul 14 bales, right? And so I just make a star pattern or a pie coming off of that. And I try to get 3 feedings there, so like how, so there will be the pie piece, then you'll cut that pie piece in half the next week and then the next week, right? So like the 3 weeks, you'll have that total, then I'll have to go look for another spot. So, I mean, obviously when they get farther out on the pie piece, it's farther apart. At the top, it's a little bit closer, but yeah. Sort of how
Are we
do
ever
it.
worried about how many cows can access a bale at once? I've heard people say like, 20 cows per bale. Or are we just worried about how many pounds per animal we're setting out?
I've noticed is when we do that and you give them a week's worth of hay, You're talking about the boss cows earlier. What we've noticed is those cows are just acting like cows. Like they're gonna, one group will get up and go graze at 10 o'clock in the morning while that other group's over getting water. Not everybody's coming to the bale bed once a day, and they're not all fighting over it. So it gives them a chance to just be relaxed and calm. So we've never really worried about that. We've just worried about putting out pounds per head per week. And then they usually, like I said, one group will get up and eat, the other group's out to water, the other group might go out and graze if it's a nice enough day. And so we've never really noticed them fighting over, even when we have 25% really good hay and the other 75% lower quality. They just kind of seem to figure it out. And we've never really had that issue with everybody fighting over it.
Yeah, and that's, I think, if you're only feeding 25% of your ration and the rest are out grazing, then you got to start worrying about it, because maybe it's only one bale that you're feeding, right? So you got to roll that out so everything has equal access to it. But if you're in the half or more of your ration is bales of hay, then I think exactly like that. They'll just, and that's why I like to go 3 different spots too, if I can. And so you'll watch these cows. They'll be in their age groups. Like your 5-year-old cows will be, whichever groups are raised at. I mean, you'll start seeing a lot of that happening out in your herd when you start doing that. This group of cows stays with this group, or this age group stays with that group, and yeah, it's
Great. Now we just need to get some edible net wrap, and then we'll be golden.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
All right, guys. Well, any last thoughts? Todd, do you have anything final, questions that you've had from folks, reflections on using this sort of strategy?
If you want to make it work, you can make it work. And if you don't, it's not going to work. And yeah, I'll do anything for Miss Haylie Shipp. I'll come on this. But there's not very many of us in our neighborhood that do it. I'll be honest about that. And there's a lot of people that think we're lazy and this, that, and the other thing. And I'll be honest about that. But I would not do it any other way. And I was talking to my son, and he got an opportunity to lease a 350 head ranch when he was the end of his junior year in college. He had to take it over that November. Actually, it was he had to take it over the November. So he had from November to May that he had to run that ranch, and he was going to college, right? And he did his capstone project on bale grazing. And it's 60 miles north of us and 60 miles west of Dickinson. That's where his ranch is. And he said, if I would have been worried about having to be there and feeding them cows every day, I would have never taken that ranch on. And he said, it doesn't matter how much hay I wasted. I've made so much more money in the 7 years that I've ranched that, So, I mean, it was just, and he's seen how we did it at home. I mean, he followed that same philosophy. He bought a bunch of May, June calving cows, so he didn't have March, April, and he just made it work. So, yeah, neither one of us would do it any other way. Our quality of life is, where we want it to be, and there's just lots of efficiencies, and we've done some really neat things on our native bare ground. We have people come out from all over looking at some of the stuff we do. But yeah, and you know what? And I'm all right with the neighbors that want to feed every day and see their cows every day. That's their decision. But I just would not ranch that way ever again. Nope, I wouldn't. So
That time element, Casey, you alluded to it too. That's people are just getting busier and busier. So you really can't trade that off. Casey, final thoughts for you.
Yeah, kind of the same thing. If you're going to do it, there's no, as Todd described it earlier, there's no perfect recipe. What I do on my place isn't going to be what works for Todd on his place. And, the neighbor's 5 miles away isn't going to work. Even if they want to try the bale grazing, they might try it a little different and do it a little different. I would honestly just suggest if you're interested, just try it. I mean, you're not going to, like Todd said, I'll never go back to doing it the feed every day and start that tractor or start a bale bed every single day. It's just, your savings in fuel right there, and the beating up your equipment at 30 below every single day probably pays for itself. I've never really penciled that out completely, but just that savings right there probably pencils it out. But I would recommend just try it. What's 1 year out of 50 years you're going to be ranching? If it doesn't work, just go back to the traditional way. But I've never talked to anybody who tried it for 1 year and said it wasn't for me. Anybody who's tried it, they'll adjust it for the next year, and then the next year they'll adjust it, and it might not always be the same every single year. We do it a little different every single year, but it's the same concept. We're just kind of fine tuning things, and we might fine tune it every year for 30 years. You never know. So I would just say try it once, and you're probably going to try it for the rest of your life.
And I have absolutely no problem sharing my formula that we've come up with over the years to anybody who wants to call, get a hold of me. I'm access. I like my shirt. It says it's not the cow, it's the how, right? Well, a lot of times that's just it. I mean, you just have to have the how, and we've done it for close to 20 years, and so we do have it refined, and like I said, my son, I don't think we'd ever do it any other way, And you ever heard the saying, "My cows look good until I started feeding them"? I mean, you start feeding them, and now they're waiting at the feed creel every morning, just waiting for that feed. My cows just aren't that way anymore. I mean, they're just out. They're happy, I think.
That's a wrap on today's Ranch Stewards podcast. Now, Todd said he'd be happy to answer those questions, give you his formula. We've got a link to his information there in the show notes. Thank you again to Todd Barkley and Casey Buffington for joining in on the Ranch Stewards podcast.
You've been listening to the Ranch Stewards podcast, a project of the Rancher Stewardship Alliance. If you like what you heard, head to ranchstewards.org for added content, or follow the Rancher Stewardship Alliance on Facebook and Instagram.